So one of the first things that I want to do is talk about the homework that was due last night. And so I want to begin, or I will begin, by giving you guys an example of some homework that was turned in that to me looked pretty good. Okay. And I'm only showing you this because, I went and looked over the homework that was turned in. And there were some people that just, I don't know, either didn't listen to instructions or completely misunderstood or whatever. That being said, a good number of people turn stuff in this way. And this is what I was expecting. So let's chat. So I've got someone to talk to about this.
I'm available.
Oh, I have a volunteer. Who's volunteering? Daniel.
Yeah.
Okay. So Daniel, you can see this homework, right?
Yes, I can.
Yeah. And I removed the student's name so as not to give praise or embarrassment. but you see at the top they put in, they did have their name. So too. They actually did this in Word as I suggested. And then they can turn in the Word document. And then, they have a little bit of stuff typed in here. And again, turning it in is going to look for that. And I also want to point out that even though it's a little bit different, and I mean a little bit, this is what you're going to do on the exam too. And on the exam, it's not based on substantial completeness and, in a very forgiving way. If you don't follow the instructions on the exam, then it will seriously affect your grade. So, and I'm not talking to you, Daniel, I just mean
Right.
like in general, like if I ask you to go ahead and paste copies of the questions at the beginning, then you should do that. And if you don't, you're kind of like begging me, right? Like, oh, I don't follow directions, and there's lots of reasons why, but especially you can imagine for somebody on my end who's trying to grade 50 papers, right? Well, I want to be able to quickly know where the information is that I need to get to in order to properly evaluate. And I'll tell you something else that is kind of like, a little bit of an inside, maybe secret, is that usually the people that aren't following the directions it's because they're kind of like hiding that they don't really even know what they're doing. So if you take the time to dig through the stuff, and I've been doing this a long time, so I've seen the pattern. Normally it's like yeah, they don't really know what they're doing, and so I'm gonna try to blow this up so hopefully you can see a little bit better. Maybe even, it says 224, let's try 250, because I want to point out something that's very useful, something very useful that this person did. And so Daniel, can you see that they put the question and then they opened it up? So or actually what this person did is they actually opened up the question and responded, and then it popped out the answer. This is good. Some people did it with the hints, which is fine too, but it's also good for me because when I go down and then after they pasted the questions, then they paste their work, right?
Right.
And this person, the work is clear. Some people they either didn't do a very good job of taking a picture of the work. And again, you want to practice this on the homework because when it's time for the exam, what you put down in your work is what's going to verify the answer you put on Ignithium, because you put your like actual answer there.
Right.
And you know, you absolutely, the course is about demonstrating that you understand the techniques, and that demonstration is showing your work. So I mean, obviously the right answer gets you halfway there, but you need the other half too, which is good work. So this person, you know, did a good job of, their work is clear, it's easy, relatively easy to follow. I'm not giving real high praise because some other people did some other things that were good too. So it's not like, oh, yours has to be exactly like this, but you'll just notice that like it's clear, it's easy to follow, you can see what they're doing, they put down their formulas, and in particular, you can see it. So some people might have used pencil, and their pencil was very light. So you know, I couldn't see clearly, or it was, you know, their picture wasn't in focus. So anyway, yeah, this is the sort of thing that you know, I was expecting. And again, in terms of like the work and the justifications and the rest of it, I'm, you know, not saying, oh, yours has to look exactly like this, because actually I've seen some other people did stuff that's the more organized. And again, what I like about this is it's just clear to look at. But you know, if it's laid out nicely and it's not sloppy and everything's, you know, organized nicely, it's easier for me to grade, and it's easier for you to get points. So if
Right.
if you're not showing me your stuff, and I mean like here, right? Well, I mean, I could kind of like, you know, follow it step by step, but it gets a little bit, you know, messy. So they could have, you know, put things more clearly in one column, and it could have been a little bit, you know, less chicken scratch like. But um you know, you know, but in general, most of the stuff was, you know, pretty you know, straightforward, and you know, easy to follow and clear. So if yours is more organized than this, then again, you're making it easier for me to give you points. But if you turn in something that looked about like this, then, you know, for the purposes of the homework anyway, you've definitely um, done your job, and you've done what I expected. If you didn't turn in, you know, something that looked like this, if you didn't have the questions first, and you didn't have your answers afterward, and in particular, I think the thing that a lot of people didn't do is they didn't open it up so that I could see the answer, because then I know, okay, what to look for, and kind of like what's going on. It's easier for me to see if you made a mistake at the middle someplace. So please try to do it that way. And obviously, this sort of thing is our first homework assignment. It's just a math review. And, you know, so if it didn't look this way this time, you know, it's not a super big deal. But it is something for you guys and girls, men and women, ladies and gentlemen, right, to calibrate, right, and refocus, and say, okay, now this is what I want to do. And if for whatever reason you didn't um, you know, have the skill to produce a document like that, you can see clearly one of your other classmates did, and it wasn't something that was done on, you know, Adobe, um, you know, special effects or whatever. So it's pretty easy to figure out. So you know, put a little bit of effort in that direction. I think I saw a hand up from Mr. Garcia for a minute. Did you have a question? Because I
Yeah, I have
actually
a
am.
very quick question. So like
Yeah.
regarding when we're turning in the homework, personally the way I did it was I scanned, I printed out the actual like I guess page of the
Yeah.
and then I went ahead and like scanned my work as a
Okay.
PDF. So the way I'm hearing is you just want it all on a single Word document, correct? So take the picture.
Yeah, honestly, and for the exam, I'm going to give you a kind of like a Word document template. It's going to be in Word, and it's going to ask you, oh, paste your pictures here and whatever. So, and I know everybody has access to Word as a Cal Poly student. You have access to that stuff. You can get it, like download Microsoft 360 or whatever. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of the easiest alternative. And if you wanted to do it differently for the homeworks, that's fine, but you might as well practice the same way you're going to do it for the exams, because the exams are timed, and you also have like the regular part of the exam that's timed, where you have to submit your answers and then the time's over with. And then I give you about a half hour to compile your work in your document and submit it on Blackboard. And so you kind of want to have a routine, like, okay, like this is how I do it. If you do it for the homework, I think that helps. So yeah, I think, put it in Word. It should be easy. Okay, Benjamin?
Yes, thank you.
Sure. Okay. And so let's see. Okay. Anybody have any other questions about the homework?
Professor, I did like I can submit it like even though I like submit it as a Word document, like I send you an email like yesterday.
Yeah, and guess what? You if you can't and everybody else can, then there's an issue, right? So
Yeah, but
and there's a way to resolve that issue, and I'll just say it now because it actually, even though it's particular to you, it is something that everybody else could benefit from. Call the IT help desk at Cal Poly, and the number, I memorized it because I've called them so many times. It's 909. I'll put it in chat. 909 869 6776. Call them, because again, like Chinlin, I'm talking about, this is the first one. It's a practice. It's low stakes,
yeah,
but it's going to be important for you to be able to do that as we go forward in other homeworks and on the exam, because the exam's going to be the same way. You're going to turn in a document to turn it in to verify your work, just like we've done for the homework. So if you can't do it, you got to figure out why, and figure out how,
yeah. It says that like we have to make it like 20 words in order to like submit it, and I did
Okay.
type bunch of words and it doesn't work. So
yeah, and then again, that's an issue for IT,
okay,
and I tried to give you guys a hint and tell you, but I will tell you one thing, and this is just an aside on the 20 word issue. In the Word document template that I provide, I have a bunch of stuff typed at the top, like directions, instructions, and stuff like that. And I've never had anybody have it rejected for that reason. So, like, one thing you might want to try is just get a regular Word document and type, a paragraph or something in it, and don't put anything else in, and then submit it and see what happens. And then if that one works, then start to paste your work and stuff like that in and try again. But the main issue is that everybody else can do it and you can't. And so there's got to be a reason, and you got to figure that out. And IT is there to help. So you know, this one, low stakes, first assignment, but you want to be able to figure it out so you can, you know, perform as you're supposed to in the rest of the class. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
Sure. Any other questions? Okay, good. So let me share my screen and we'll go to Ignatium. And I'm going to, and I'll tell you, Daniel, since you were so helpful, can you keep an eye on the chat for me? And if there's somebody that pops in with an important question,
Yeah, actually, Michael Quintana, he was saying that he needed help on number 19. I'm assuming from the first math review.
Oh yeah. Well, okay, so Michael, I'll tell you, don't worry about it. A lot of people had trouble on that one, and I have to go back and check my notes and take a look at it. It's not super important because it's not like you're going to be asked that particular question on an exam. I think there's something goofy, and I don't know if occasionally I set something to give a wrong answer because I want students to realize that, you know, they should just justify their answer the best that they can. If it was to turn out, let's say on an exam or something like that, that you actually calculated an answer correctly, and we'll go through all the methods for the techniques you're going to need to answer the questions on the exam in this class, and Ignatium scored you wrong, right? Because they goofed something up on, you know, their calculation. I would still, and that's part of the reason of having your work there, I would still give you credit. Now, I can't tell you something really quick. Hold on just a second. So that question, and who was asking again? Michael Kitana? Is that right?
Yeah, that was him.
Yeah, Michael, are you here? I mean, you have the mic.
He said he's here. He's communicating through the text box.
Yeah, I have my mic.
Okay. Yeah, okay. So I want to show you really quickly. And let's see. Okay, we'll do that one. So what you should have done, and the only reason why I'm doing this is to kind of give you some peace of mind that your technique was good, even if the answer that Ignatium gave wasn't matching it. So depending upon the version that you got, you should have had one equation that was downward sloping and one that was upward sloping like this. And then, and we talked about this a little bit. Then it asked, oh, okay. There's some value in the domain that's over here. And the only thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to type x star plus 5. Okay, does that make sense to you so far, Michael?
Yeah, I actually tried that method by finding the endpoints and then finding the area of the triangle, but the answer was still significantly smaller than the true answer that they had on Ignatium.
Yeah. But this is where I want to correct you. It might not be the true answer, right?
Yeah,
meaning like your answer was probably just fine, and that's why I'm doing this. I have to, again, I would have to go back and check to be clear, but I think it's probably one of the ones that I set to be wrong to make a point. But that's why I'm talking about this right now, because I want to make sure that you understand the technique. And so now you see how I split the two graphs, and this would be x plus 5. And then you end up with these two trapezoids, right? And you're just supposed to take the area, and I think we even talked about this, last time, but say this is area A, and this one is area B, and you're supposed to take the difference between them, right? So it's BA minus B for those two trapezoids. And is that what you did, Michael?
Well, first I did the area, and then I tried to find the I know you said that we shouldn't, but I tried to find the integral using the difference of the functions and taking the antiderivative, and then I put the two x's. Well, I set the equations equal to each other to find out what x1 was. Then I plugged x1 into the function to find what x2 was, and then I found the integral, the difference between the two x, between x1 and x2.
Right. And I'll give you one other, like, this is just like a little hint, and this is as you're learning, and you should probably realize that I've probably had as much math training as probably any professor on the campus of Cal Poly, including those that have a PhD in math. But maybe not. I mean, so the chair of the math department, Barrett Givens, and we were both in graduate math classes at UC Santa Barbara while I was going to graduate school. I graduated before she did, but she graduated a little bit after I did. So I've done tons of math. I love math. Math is my buddy. But the more and more math you do, one of the things is, and you probably know this, Michael, I don't know if you like this about math or not, but I do. And that is, there are lots of different ways, as long as you're using the right math rules, right, to get to the correct answer. You know what I mean, Michael?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so one of the things that you do when you're first like learning a technique and you want to know if it's right is you use multiple ways and see if you get to the same answer. So I would encourage you, I'm not saying what you did, it is or it isn't right. I don't teach those techniques because they're technically not required for this class. So, and I think they may be fair game pretty soon because I'll have to talk to Dr. Brown, but now I think everybody that's an econ major is required to take at least one class of calculus. So the only issue is whether or not they took that class before they took this class. So I would have to add it as a prereq. And we have some students that are what you might call legacy students, that there was a time in the not too distant past where you could be an econ major in a particular track or like sub program, and you didn't have to take calculus. But so nevertheless, calculus is everywhere in econ. It's super useful for us. And yeah, but since I don't, these are the techniques that I do teach. And I would say, oh, okay, go and do it this way. And if your answers align, you're doing it using the integral and you're doing it using this technique, and they come out to be the same, then you're golden, right? Everything matches. But if you just do it the one way and you don't get the right feedback from Ignithium to kind of give you confidence, and you have to kind of play with it, and or ask me, and I would spend more time on this particular question, but I don't think it's really important for us as we go forward, other than to understand that we want to take the difference between two areas, and we're going to talk more about that as we go forward. Actually, this whole idea of taking the difference between the two areas is important to us, but that particular problem, apart from illustrating this, isn't like something we want to spend tons of time on. Okay, and so do you feel like your questions were answered, Michael? Or
yeah, now that you drew it out like that, because I kind of drew it like one on top of the other, and but now when you draw it like that, it kind of makes a little bit more sense on taking the difference between the two.
yeah, and honestly, the other thing that also is pretty good is so if you leave it like this, you'll notice that to the left of X star, and this is something worth pointing out. So this is our crossing point, X star, right? You can see it there. So here, the area of the blue line is obviously bigger than the area below the red line. So there's some positive contribution to the difference here. And then there's some area here where the red line is above the blue line. So the area below the red line is bigger than the area below the blue line. And there's would be negative contribution on this side. Do you see what I mean? So here it would be positive and there it would be negative.
Yeah, I get it.
Yeah, okay. And so you'd be taking, assuming that this area, like it's drawn in this particular picture, is larger than this negative contribution to the total area. That's the difference between the two. The reason why I hesitate to say negative area is because there's really no such thing, right? Area is a positive concept. When we take the difference between these two areas, you could get a negative net, which is a little bit hard to say clearly, but I think you probably get the point, Michael, right? This would be positive and this is negative. So if you were really careful, you could just take the difference, or making sure that, yeah, like the difference between these two triangles. But for me, and for some reasons that are explained in the video, or the videos that you're being assigned to watch, this is clearer, and there's less chance that you'll goof up. So I generally prefer this in most cases, and I think that most of the times on Ignithium, it's this sort of calculation that gives the final result. There's one place where I know that taking the difference between the triangles it ends up being a better way to do a particular answer. And I'll point that out when we get there. But anyway, yeah, lots of different ways to do this stuff. Okay, so I'm gonna stop sharing and go back to Ignition. Okay, so where are we? Stop share screen, share. Okay, and I'm gonna log in if I can. Okay. So our next homework, supply and demand. Okay. So I want to point out to everybody here that a lot of the difference between the math review homework and what you guys are and girls are going to see in these coming assignments, they're the exact same problems, but the only difference is that there's new vocabulary. And this is the applied economics part. You have to learn what's the economics term for this math concept. And that's really all of economics. Or I would say maybe not exactly all of it, but 95% of econ is just using some jargon within our discipline to refer to a familiar math concept that most 9th or 10th graders know. and that's it. It could be the case that later on you're doing stuff that's much more advanced, like in graduate school, and maybe the 10th grader wouldn't know. But for most things that we do, it's pretty simple. Maybe the econometrics is stuff that kids might not have a good foundation in statistics and they may not be familiar with, but most of it's just familiar vocabulary. So let's see. Because I have been chatting with you, Daniel, why don't you go ahead and help me out, you and Michael, on this first one.
Sure
and
thing.
Okay, so it says consider this inverse demand function. So that's part of our first jargon, right? So we have this function and you should feel free to graph it, right? In economics, we put P, remember, on the vertical axis and Q on the horizontal axis. So you can graph that in PQ space instead of YX space. And then it asks, what's the limit price? Do you have any idea, Daniel, what they mean by limit price?
So I would assume like that's the most they would pay.
Okay. Yeah. I think you got it. And what about you, Michael? Do you kind of agree?
Yeah.
Yeah. So and
Would
we'll
be
look at
like
the
the
hand.
equilibrium price, wouldn't it?
Well, no. So here there's no equilibrium because we just have demand. We don't have any supply.
Oh, yeah.
But limit means, in this context, what's the highest price at which demand falls to zero? So on the math review, we just asked, what's the vertical intercept or what's the y-intercept? And since we're graphing y on the y, p on the y-axis, it would be 95. But here, what we know, if we were to draw out demand, is that once the price gets to 95, the quantity demanded is zero. And if at any price above that, the quantity demanded stays zero, right? So nobody's willing to pay more than $95 for a unit of this good. Okay.
Sounds good.
Yeah. So let's try, because we'll just do one more, a simple one here. we'll try question number 2. So again, look at the inverse demand function and what's the maximum quantity that would be demanded at any price? Okay. So and so as you and Michael consider that, I'll open this up a little bit and ask if anybody has an answer or they want to chat about it a little bit as an idea.
So I got 19, and basically all I did was I moved the 5 for the quantity, and I like removed the price because we're not asking about the price, we're asking about the quantity. So I just moved the 5 over, and I just wanted to reduce the variable by itself, so I divided everything by 5, and I got my answer at 19.
Yeah, so okay, and what do you think of that, Michael?
Yeah, I just solved for Q and plugged in 0 for Y. Well,
Yeah, so
basically solved for X.
yeah, so I would like sort of kibitz, which they mean a minor criticism of your explanation, Daniel, because like what we do if we draw out the demand curve is you notice that the demand curve is going to cross the horizontal axis, which is the quantity axis, at some maximum quantity. And Michael's right that it happens to be where the price is equal to 0. So it's sort of conceptually important that we're making the connection. Oh, at a price of 0, that's when the market or the person that's buying the good is going to buy all they want, the most. It's free, right? So I'm going to take, that's when I'm going to get the maximum. I don't know if you understand what I'm saying, Daniel, but I don't know if you've ever.
I get what you're saying, because I do remember when I introduced it, I kind of like threw off price, but I get what you're saying. It's still involving price. It's the price at 0.
Yeah, right, exactly. And I don't know if you've ever been in one of these situations. I can think of probably like a half dozen times in my life where you go someplace and it's like a convention or, somebody like a weird situation, and they're actually giving away something. Maybe it was like last year's model, and like people are taking handfuls and like just everything they can carry, and they're taking one for their grandma and one for their cousin because they're
Right.
like, oh, it's free, and
Yeah.
and so yeah, that's when people start behaving that way. Is like, okay, it's free, I'm taking as much as I can, and that's what happens when the price hits 0. You get that maximum quantity demanded. And sure, it relates to the math of where the demand curve hits the horizontal axis. And if we were going to ask this question in a purely math way, without our econ interpretation, without our econ jargon, we would just say, oh, for this equation, what's the horizontal intercept, right? And you would calculate the horizontal intercept by setting y equal to 0. That's what's on the x-axis, and then you go ahead and you find the x that satisfies that, or if you graphed it well, you have that information available. But here, right, we're relating it to this economic phenomenon that we just talked about, and that's what happens in econ, right? Is we repeatedly try to describe people's behavior in economic situations, buying and selling, producing, consuming, in a mathematical way, just so we can analyze it and we have precision. So, okay, so we did questions 1 and 2. You all should be able to, and we'll pick this up on Thursday and work through whatever questions you all have on this assignment. This is our next homework assignment. It would be due next Monday at midnight, and I will probably put that to the effect on Blackboard, but probably not until Thursday. So between now and Thursday, for the activity, what you should do is go ahead and go through these questions and see if there are some that jump out as being ones you like to discuss on Thursday, because, you know, I probably on Thursday will start talking about some of these, but these end up being relatively simple. And again, they get more complicated as we get down. And like we saw with number 19 on the previous one, you know, so now we're starting to play for keeps. So if we see any errors here, these are potential questions you might want to see, you might actually see on an exam. So, and hopefully that gives you some more motivation. I think I said this before, but I'll say it again now. Almost all of the questions that you'll see on the exam, with the exception of some that are graphing, are going to be versions of these questions that you're doing on the homework. So you really want to know how to do them all. That way, when you see them in the exam, you don't have any trouble. Okay. Are there any quick questions before we take our little 10-minute break? Okay. So I'm going to stop sharing, and this will, okay, there we go. So at least all this will be on the screen, and hopefully you'll be able to follow it. And I'm getting to the main point right now, which is the first fundamental welfare theorem in this sort of precise expression. It makes us rely on this unmeasurable concept of Pareto efficiency. And I said it's not generally measurable. And what I mean by that is that in some particular contexts, you can calculate Pareto efficiency, but it relies on something that you probably wouldn't think about. And that is that it's not always easy to compare when someone is better off and when someone is worse off. Okay, so who wants to play a game? Who wants to talk for a minute? Do we have a volunteer? Okay, I'll pick Nure Nietzsche Rockterm. Are you there this morning? Did I say your name right?
No.
No. Okay, you want to give me a tutorial?
It's not Tanisha.
Not to Nietzsche. Okay, not to Nietzsche. How are you doing this morning?
I'm good. How are you?
Pretty good. Pretty good. So I said Pareto efficiency isn't always measurable, and that kind of causes a problem if we want to use it in practice. And so maybe, do you have anything in your family that is like a family heirloom, something that you guys particularly value, that's not really easily related to maybe what its price is? Do you know what I mean by family heirloom? So on the fireplace behind me, I have a picture of my mom's parents when they were younger. Maybe I can show you guys. And my wife has, well, no, that's not the young picture, that's the old picture. Okay, this is a picture of my wife's parents. Can you guys see that?
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, so and her grandfather that you saw there, he was sheriff in a town down in Jalisco, Mexico, and he was murdered because he was doing his job. That was back in the day. So anyway, so they have that picture of him, and so I think it's a nice picture. So Nadanisha, do you have something like that? Something, and I have like a quilt that my grandmother made too.
Yeah,
you know what I'm
we
talking?
have-
Yes, something like that. Yeah.
yeah.
So did you ever think to yourself like, okay, so what's the price of that? Like, so the picture that I showed you of my wife's grandparents, she had it blown up to like a poster size, and on the wall, kind of like a piece of art. And when I first saw it, when we first met, I thought it was like a cool old picture. I didn't know she was related to the people in the picture. But I guess the point I'm trying to make, Nadanisha, is that if you think about things like that and you think, well, you know, like, what's the value of this to somebody else? What's the value of this to the market? It's probably not very much, right?
Yeah.
But to you, it has a lot of value. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because it has like there's a personal connection, a personal value. Now, economics doesn't say, oh, well, our theory only applies to human behavior when it doesn't involve items that have an emotional connection to them, right? Ours is a universal theory of human behavior. And we'll talk even more about that. But whenever people have to assign, and remember, when we're talking about an allocation, because we said at the very, very beginning that economics is a scientific study of resource allocation mechanisms. Whenever we have to assign a value to something, economics is supposed to tell us how to do it and how people make their decisions. So our theory is supposed to apply to that stuff too, right? So I don't know if you've thought about that or not, but how well do you think that economics does at valuing things like family heirlooms?
Not sure.
What's that? I couldn't hear you.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, well, you say you're not sure, and that's because it probably doesn't do a very good job of it. And so Pareto efficiency would have us be able to make the types of comparisons that we're talking about. That, you know, if I take a family photo away from you, I'm making you worse off and making somebody else better off. I can make those kinds of comparisons with Pareto efficiency as a concept, but it's really hard when I'm thinking, well, okay, how much worse off are you? Are you a lot worse off when I take the family picture away from you? And how much better off is somebody else? Because what we're talking about is, you know, maybe that picture has a lot of value to you. Maybe it's like, you know, if you lost it, you would be, you know, devastated, and you'd be willing to pay $1,000 to get it back, right? But for somebody else who was just looking at it as like a you know, cute little picture that maybe they would display or something like that, maybe it's worth, you know, $5 or $10 to them. So the problem with Pareto efficiency when we're talking about real world situations is that there are some things, some items that do end up getting sometimes traded around the economy. And it's difficult to place value on those items. So we can't really say that one person's benefit is so much, like $10, and somebody else's loss is 1,000. We really don't know, because values like that are difficult to measure. So Pareto efficiency is problematic for, let's say, many applications, because values used to measure the costs and benefits are difficult to calculate. And the real issue is that most of the time we're going to calculate values is that usually values in economics are measured with dollars. So they're monetary values. And guess what? It's just like I don't know if you guys have ever seen those Visa commercials, but they say, you know, I take my girlfriend out to dinner and that's $20. I buy her some roses and that's $30. And, you know, then they say a perfect evening with someone you love, priceless, right? So there are some things that can't really be put in dollar terms. So some things are just not easily measured in dollars. Okay. So what that leaves us with is, well, there's a bunch of stuff that is easily measured with dollars, right? So what we do is, instead of using, so I'll say, so when we economists, right, discuss the well-being of people, we confine ourselves in many cases to situations where dollar values are an appropriate way to measure the goods discussed. Now, I'll ask, can anybody think of a situation, not Tanisha or anybody else, can you think of a situation where maybe you've heard of economists discussing values that are difficult to measure in dollars, but nevertheless they do it. Anybody?
Marginal utility?
Well, but we don't measure marginal utility in dollars, right? We measure it in utility.
Right.
Right. Okay, I don't know if you guys have heard of this concept, but it's one of the most controversial ones that economists play around with. It's called the value of a statistical life. So economists and others, but mostly economists, calculate the value of a person's, not any particular person's, but of a person's life. And they use it for lots of different things, like trying to figure out what's the right amount to charge for life insurance, and to explain why people in dangerous occupations that have a high probability that are higher than most others that they'll die, get paid higher wages, and helping policymakers figure out whether or not they should, with a limited budget, spend money on, let's say, coronavirus treatments or improving road safety. So that's one of the places where we're kind of like pushed to the limits and there of what our discipline can do. And there are lots of controversies, as you might imagine, with trying to put a dollar value on a life. Nevertheless, we do that. So when we're in these types of situations where dollar values make sense, right? You're trading tennis shoes or tomatoes. It's where people don't have a difficult time putting a dollar value on stuff. Then we use this concept that we already talked about. So I'll say in these common situations, economists rely on general economic efficiency instead of Pareto efficiency. And the only thing that we can say is that if a situation is Pareto efficient, then it will also be generally economically efficient, but it doesn't work the other way. So you can have a situation that's generally economically efficient and is not Pareto efficient. So just to be clear, Pareto efficiency is more restricted than general economic efficiency. But general economic efficiency is measurable. And so we'll just be saying that things are efficient. And again, we talked about this briefly, but there are two types of efficiency to consider. And one of them is productive efficiency. And the other one is distributional or allocative efficiency. So, and I'll just put this because we're not going to be this specific anymore in differentiating between these concepts, but these are the things that you should know as you read and you go further in other courses. You might have situations where you run across that the authors are talking just about Pareto efficiency, and they're not talking about general economic efficiency, or they're talking about just general economic efficiency, and they confine themselves to that. And so you want to be able to know that they're different concepts, and a little bit about how they're related and what they mean. But the concept of efficiency that we're going to use mostly in this class is just a general economic efficiency. And it's nice because we assume everything is measured in dollar terms. And what that means is that, and we talked about this a little bit last time, is that when you're talking about general economic efficiency, because you can measure everything in dollar terms, it's easy to see how you can reallocate resources, and to be more concrete, how you can rearrange production to lower cost, or you can rearrange the distribution of some good, like, let's say coronavirus vaccine, right? Instead of giving it to people who are just older, giving it to other people who maybe are willing to pay more, where everybody can be made better off, because you can just measure the flow of dollars between the people, and you don't have to worry about these issues that, oh, well, am I really trading somebody's life? Am I really trading somebody's heirloom? Am I really trading somebody's illness versus someone else's illness? All of those things disappear when we talk about general economic efficiency, because we've already assumed that what we're discussing are resources that are comparable enough to one another that we can measure everything in dollars and cents. So it's important to know that that's kind of a hidden assumption behind the scenes. And a lot of economists and in a lot of textbooks, at the end, they come up with these kind of like strong conclusions or pronouncements that, oh, this is an inefficient situation, and that's kind of a way of saying that it's bad, and so we shouldn't do it. But if you dig a little bit deeper, then you can say like, oh, well, is that really true? Is it right to think that we've measured efficiency properly? Because we're talking about general economic efficiency, we're assuming everything can be boiled down to dollars and cents. And guess what? When you're talking about something like, let's say, whether or not somebody has housing, maybe it's not clear that you can clearly measure that in terms of dollars and cents. And once economists get going and we get going with our calculations, a lot of the assumptions that we're making drift into the background. And honestly, as somebody who's going to be potentially informing policymakers, I think I told you all that I've done consulting with the Metropolitan Water District and the South Coast South Coast Air Quality Management District over environmental issues. And it's so funny that once you put a number on something, and by that I mean like a dollar value, that kind of takes on a life of its own. And it's really common for policymakers to rely on that, because all these other things that we're talking about, right, they're real, but it's difficult to really measure the true impact on somebody of being homeless or not being homeless, or having a risky job or not having a risky job. And so a lot of times in situations where economists are talking about the allocation of resources to reduce pollution or to produce affordable housing, they come up with numbers that measure the costs and the benefits. but and you can see that there are lots of people in the audience that are uncomfortable with an inclusion. So I'll Nadanicha, you still with me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to tell you about a quick story of a situation where the Air Quality Management District was trying to make a decision, and see if you can visualize. Do you know what a meat rendering plant is? Do you know what meat rendering is?
No.
No. Okay. So if you go and you buy a hamburger from In-N-Out, you ever go to In-N-Out?
Yes.
Yeah, that's right. That's what hamburgers are all about. It's great. Do you have a favorite hamburger from In-N-Out?
No.
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 Have you had the double animal style?
No, I only have the cheese one, I think.
Yeah. Well, it's on the secret menu. You should order your hamburger animal style next time.
Okay, I will.
Yeah, it's really good. So we have all of these restaurants that make hamburgers and all the rest of it. At the end of the night, they normally end. Has anybody here worked for a restaurant doing some cooking at In-N-Out or anything like that?
I've worked at I worked at the Cal Poly, the dining hall, so kind of familiar with like.
Okay, did you do any cooking for
Yeah.
them? Okay, so who am I talking to right now?
This is Ben Garcia.
Okay, Ben. So at the end, you have like all this grease and like leftover stuff, right?
Yeah.
What do you do with that?
You have to like scrape it off the grill, and then like we have like these special containers that like is made for like the grease that we throw away basically, but it has to be like not separate, but you have to make sure it's done.
Yeah, you don't just throw it in the trash, right?
No, yeah. There's I think like a special drain or like there's a certain like, compartment. You just can't throw it away with like the regular trash or like put it down a sink or anything like that.
Yeah. Well, with most restaurants and even like grocery stores and stuff like that that have like leftover like inventory and they have to get rid of it, and they can't like donate it to a food bank or whatever because like fresh meat products, that kind of thing. It goes to a meat rendering plant. And so basically they take all this rotten meat and grease and they process it, and they do things like they'll turn it into soap and different sort of products. But you can imagine that the process involves a lot of bad smells, right? I don't know if the grease stinks at the end or not. Does it?
I mean, I wouldn't choose to smell it willingly, but you kind of get used to it.
Yeah. Well, and imagine taking all of that grease and then like all of like the leftover meat and all the, like where you're getting like rotting meat, right? And putting it in one place and then like cooking it and boiling it down and getting all of the oils and everything off of it so you can use it in soap or whatever. It stinks. It's really, really smells badly. And in Los Angeles, it turns out for historic reasons, since like the 1940s, and you know how cities grow, right? So there was like downtown Los Angeles to get more and more population and it spreads out. Well, has anybody ever been to Boyle Heights? Boyle Heights.
Yeah, I've been to Boyle Heights a few times.
Yeah, well, if you take the 5 freeway into Los Angeles, then you'll pass through Boyle Heights. Well, Boyle Heights, for again historic reasons, ended up being the home in the greater Los Angeles region to most of these meat rendering plants. And then the community grew up around it. And now you have a lot of people who live in Boyle Heights that are exposed not to stuff that's gonna kill them, right? But to these awful stinky smells. It's like living next to a garbage dump, but like with the worst, odor you can imagine, which is, like rotting flesh.
Right.
Right?
Right. It diminishes the quality of life. I mean, I know I used to live in Huntington Park, and down the street we had a Farmer John's slaughter factory. So 6 in the
Okay.
morning, beautiful
It's-
smell in the morning.
Yeah, wake you
Oh,
up, right?
God. No, it was it was really bad. It was really bad.
I told you I was born in HP, right? So
No, no.
yeah, Huntington Park Hospital. That's
Oh,
my
I
birth
was too.
certificate.
That's cool.
So anyway, you can imagine, right? This stuff stinks to high heaven. And so the AQMD gets a request to go there and examine the air quality and all the rest of it. And basically, so I'm at the hearing, and we have school buses of kids that live across the street from these meat rendering plants that are saying what you're saying, Daniel, like, we're out playing in the playground and this horrible smell comes and my eyes water and I got to run into the classroom and like, and so the AQMD is thinking these meat rendering plants, again, they were there first, right? And the communities came around them. And it's just because, finding a place to live in LA, like that's affordable. Nobody wants to live next to the meat rendering plant, right? So originally those places were cheap, and now they've gotten a little bit more expensive, but the meat rendering plant's still there. So the AQMD is considering having these meat rendering plants put on equipment that covers, like sealing it, in a steel container with a vent, so that all of the odor is captured when they're doing their processing. Now, the issue is, you can imagine, like in trash and recycling, right? There's not tons of money being made. So they're thinking about having these meat rendering plants put on these pieces of ventilation equipment that's going to be several $1 million, right, to enclose their operation, to save the school kids in the community from having to be exposed to the bad odor, which the bad odor doesn't have health effects that are measurable. You can't say that it causes heart attacks and asthma attacks like you can with other air pollutants. So when you do the numbers on the back end, you end up with this big cost and this relatively small benefit that you can measure. And everybody's uncomfortable, because you realize the conclusion of that economic analysis is that it doesn't make sense. And we also had people come and testify that were from the meat rendering workers, which was a unionized occupation. And these were people with regular kind of skills. They weren't, they'd worked there for 20, 30 years and they knew how to do the meat rendering, but they weren't like, PhDs in chemistry and the rest of it. It was regular blue collar, but good work, with benefits and stuff like that. And so, and the owners from the meat rendering plants testified, and they're like, hey, listen, if you make us pay millions of dollars to install this equipment, we're going to have to shut down and move out of Boyle Heights to someplace in the high desert. And all these people that work here are going to lose their jobs, or at least have to move if they can. So you have all of these, competing interests. And if you look at the hard numbers just tell you lost jobs, lost wages, costs for the plants to install against, and we even had, so we had school buses of children coming from Boyle Heights, and we had a priest from the local Catholic church come and testify about how stinky it was. So what's going on? How do you compare the community feeling and impact, the Catholic priest and the school kids against the workers and the meat rendering company that's been there before anybody else was there? Like, I was here first, right? How do you measure those competing values? Well, in fact, again, you boil down what you can measure, and the economic analysis tells you, listen, there's no way that the benefits here that we can measure clearly outweigh the costs of having these meat rendering plants install the equipment, so they can control their smell and their ventilation. But the only reason why I bring up the story is to make it a little bit more realistic, that if somebody in that group that was contesting, right, and asking for the ventilation equipment to be installed had said, listen, I know what your economic analysis says, but in economics, it's not that these impacts aren't recognized on the community. It's just that they're difficult to measure. And so your numbers showing that the costs are higher than the benefits to the community, they're skewed. There's stuff that's left out. Now, I, as an economist, being hired by the AQMD to do the analysis, I can't say that, because I'm being paid to write a report in the way that their management is asking me to write it, right? So they have protocols and they do editing. So it's not like I'm free to say whatever I want to say. But the people making the decision on the board, they look at the numbers, and suddenly those numbers take on a life of their own. And if you don't know what's missing from our calculations, then you won't ever know. And obviously, the school kids and the priest, they didn't hire an economic consultant. But if you guys ever volunteer or whatever, just bear in mind, because we're only going to talk about this at the beginning of the class. As you guys notice, we're interested in learning the techniques for calculating what we do calculate. But somebody should tell you at some point in time that those calculations oftentimes leave things out that are important. And the only reason they're not calculated is because we don't know how to measure them very well as economists. They're hard to measure. Some economists spend a lot of time doing research and trying to put numbers on things like the value of somebody's life, or the cost of pain and suffering from an illness, or the difficulties people encounter being exposed to stinky smells. But those techniques are not, because those things are difficult to measure, they're not widely accepted. They're subject to lots of criticism, and they're not the first things that we do as economists. So I know it probably seems like I'm spending a lot of time on this stuff at the beginning, but somebody has to tell you at some point in time to be careful, because just because you can calculate a number doesn't mean that that number captures everything that's important in deciding. And that's, like I said, economics is oftentimes decision science, but deciding public policy. and again, from personal experience, and you all will be surprised in the future if you end up doing this kind of work for, you know, a consulting agency or a government agency, that once the numbers are there in black and white, a lot of times people stop asking questions about how they were calculated. So, okay, so general economic efficiency. So how do we measure general economic efficiency? Well, so I'm just going to say efficiency is measured, and I'm gonna put two equivalent concepts here. It is measured by, this is net social benefit, or what you guys might be familiar with, total surplus. I put them both down because most students come into this class and they're familiar with the idea of total surplus, and total surplus to me is kind of like a toddler's toy. Not that economists don't talk about it, and they do, but total surplus is introduced first because it's easy. It's like a useful lie. It's easy to communicate. But net social benefit is actually a better, more robust calculation. And again, I'll say this maybe 2 or 3 more times before I stop saying it. Net social benefit, when you get the calculation, it ends up being equivalent to total surplus. It's just a better calculation method. So a different way to get to the same result. But because people are familiar with total surplus, a lot of times they rely on it as kind of like a crutch or some training wheels. And I would encourage you know, you to, as soon as you can, to start to see why net social benefit is a better method of calculation. And anyway, I won't make too much of it, but it's something that you need to know, and obviously something that we discuss and calculate in the class. So net social benefit, the calculation is total social benefit. So I'm going to write these out in parentheses in the beginning, and then we'll just start using the abbreviations. Total social benefit minus total social cost. And I can't give you an equivalent easy answer for total surplus. So let's see. Joshua, you here this morning?
Yes,
Joshua.
ma'am.
How are you doing, Joshua?
I'm doing good.
So do you remember the concept of total surplus from principles?
Vaguely, yeah.
Okay, well, if I was going to ask you to like complete this equation, total surplus is equal to whatever, what would you put?
I would do producer surplus plus consumer surplus.
Right. Okay. And would you ever put anything else?
Not that I learned, no.
Okay. Yeah. So that's what most people do. And those are important concepts, and we'll talk about them too. So I'm going to put it here. So CS for consumer surplus, okay, plus producer surplus. And that's right. But this is why it's a useful lie, right? Plus tax revenue minus subsidies plus external benefits minus external costs plus, okay, so Joshua, do you see what I've written?
I do.
Yeah, and you didn't mention any of these things, right? and why? You're like, well, because I didn't know. But I'll tell you, even if you did know, you might not mention them because it's not easy to remember. It doesn't just, I mean, it kind of rolls off the tongue, right? Total surplus is consumer surplus plus producer surplus, but right? But this other stuff is like, whoa, wait a minute. And I put little dots here because the list goes on and on. But guess what? Joshua, are you there?
Yeah.
Yeah. So this one never changes. You got it. Everything's right there. So that's why I say that, and remember that net social benefit is, I'm going to put triple equal sign, is equal to total surplus. The calculation is the same. So you see what I mean, Joshua, that net social benefit is probably the easier one to remember.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah. So again, a lot of you are probably going to be tempted to just rely on total surplus for a while, but I'd encourage you to kind of get rid of that as soon as you can. And the last thing that I want to say for today is this, and so this is just general economic efficiency. I'm just gonna write it that way. Means that net social benefit is maximized. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, it means that if I have two situations, I'll call situation A, so the net social benefit I'll put a little a there, is greater than the net social benefit in situation B, means that situation A is more efficient than situation B. And notice I said more efficient, right? But I didn't say that situation A was efficient. But let's say I have a situation, so the net social benefit of some situation, I'm going to call it star, is efficient, means that the net social benefit from situation star is greater. And this is a weak greater than sign. So it's greater than or equal to, right? the net social benefit from all other situations. Okay. So when we restate the first fundamental welfare theorem this way, the first fundamental welfare theorem tells us that the equilibrium, and note that we usually use this sort of abbreviation for equilibrium in economics. Makes sense, right? Instead of writing out the whole word the whole time, every time. The equilibrium of a competitive market, call it, normally we say that's X star, right? Has the highest, and now I'll write as a function of all possible outcomes. Okay. So that's what we're going to do from now on. We're going to stick with this total surplus net social benefit and concept, and then the next part of the class is devoted to demonstrating the first fundamental welfare theorem. So what I'm going to do is, in the lectures, I'm going to show you how to calculate net social benefit for the equilibrium quantity in a competitive market, and then we'll pick a couple of other outcomes and show you that the net social benefit is smaller, and we'll define this concept of deadweight loss, which is the reduction in net social benefit of moving away from the equilibrium quantity, right? Moving to a lower level of net social benefit. And that's it. Okay, so does anybody have any questions?